All right, I think that was a tough panel to follow, but I think we got a good crew here for the next one. And so for this, we've titled this panel, Can the U.S. Have It All? Energy Dominance in a Transitioning World. So we brought together this group of experts here to discuss, if and how the United States can restore and maintain its energy dominance in a world attempting to undergo an energy transition. So we're going to discuss whether pursuing an all of the above resource policy is optimal and what we would need to do to achieve that. And to the extent that we have time, we're going to delve into supply chain concerns, trade-offs, et cetera. So I want to dive right in since we're a bit behind schedule. So starting next to me, I have, and I'm going to I always get your last name. It's Kevin Dayaratna, and he's the director of the Center for Data Analysis and the chief statistician for the Heritage Foundation. Across from me here, we have Stephanie Pronco, is a senior international trade specialist at the Nuclear Energy Institute. Next to her, Landon Derentz is the vice president of energy and infrastructure and the senior director and Morningstar chair for global energy security at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center. Wow, that was a mouthful.
Dick is very adamant that I have the chair on there, though.
Okay, you've got to shorten your intro. Okay, man. All right, and then Kevin Book is the managing director of research at ClearView Energy Partners, where he covers energy geopolitics and fossil energy policy. So as I like to do with all the panels, I like to start with a nice general question just to kick us off. So Landon, your portfolio has been global for years now. So maybe could you speak to what new energy sector frontiers and development trends you're seeing? Kind of what is energy dominance? Is the United States well positioned to either achieve or maintain it?
Well, it's great to be back here at the Drake Dialogue. For those that know me, I've been a little bit mum lately, so I do have a little bit of a voice issue, but excited to be here and thrilled to be on part of this panel and thinking about the macro issues around energy dominance, around energy transition, and I think it'll be a fruitful discussion. Maybe I can start by just talking about how I think energy dominance is being defined in Washington, D.C. right now, as we have a National Energy Dominance Council that the president stood up. And I think it really runs around two variables. It has to do with affordability, particularly in the domestic context, and exports and our ability to take abundance and share that with the globe, especially in times of crisis. So in terms of affordability and the domestic narrative, I think, Henry Hub prices for natural gas at $3, looking at a world in which we've gone from 20 years ago being a net importer, a peak of net imports of oil of 12 million barrels a day, producing now about 150 times as much conventional oil as we did back then. And being a net exporter. Same story on gas. 2016, zero LNG exports. Today we're getting close to 15 BCFD, 150 billion cubic meters annually, different metrics, but a lot of gas. I think maybe around 2015 we were consuming as a nation somewhere around 650, 700, and so we're talking about 150 now, and moving up to, by 2030, 300 billion cubic meters of gas exports and LNG. That is abundance. It's abundance domestically. It reflects the fact that prices are low. The president's very adamant about affordability. That's been a feature of the discussions. So I think on the conventional energy side, we're unequivocally in a moment of abundance or energy dominance. And I think you can see that being impactful on the international stage as well. When you have Russia, invade Ukraine and watch Europe shift away from 40% reliance on Russian natural gas, backfilled predominantly by U.S. supply, that is energy dominance being projected. I think just one caveat on this, though, and Mike Summers mentioned 30 to 40% increase in energy demand over a much longer horizon. I will say, a lot of that isn't just conventional energy. That'll grow as well, but it's a lot of electrification. And I do think that there's a conversation we need to have about the temporal element of energy dominance. We are dominant today. How do we make sure we're dominant in a decade? Because I think you need to have a little foresight as we discuss, and hopefully we can get into it as we have this conversation.
So I think that is again, and I don't ask them to do this. They make such great segues for me. It makes my job so easy. It just can flip from speaker to speaker. And to go back to the last panel a little bit, you talk about energy dominance in the future. I know I talked with Will quite a bit about grid enhancing technologies in the U.S. market share there, and as we get to electrification, and how we can project that forward as well. But maybe, Kevin, I can go to you, because that speaks to energy transition as well, and how the world's energy use, is evolving. I think we had a question in Mike's keynote about energy transition, and are we actually seeing an energy transition and so on. And from my perspective as an electric power guy, I think of that as how the grid is operated, as less opposed to, say, fuel sources. But I don't know, Kevin, I would appreciate your perspective. Like, are we in a transitioning world, or how are you seeing, if we are, that transition play out?
Thanks, Stephen. It's good to be here. This is my first time, second time at the museum, and it's great to see you all. So Mike Summers did very, I think, adequately describe the nature of energy transition as it stands today. It is not a question of substitution, but supplementation. New clean resources are supplements to the existing supply stack for the most part. And we're not yet at a point of substitution. But I'm going to give you two other transitions to think about, because I think that we are very much in at least one of the two, and I think the second one maybe also. The first one is a transition from scarcity to adequacy. I didn't use the word abundance. Perhaps abundance is appropriate at different times. I think adequacy is a more cautious term. But if you look at the United States, for decades, until the middle of the last decade, we were in a period of very significant scarcity. So talking about 25% or more on a net import basis going to our total supply. Today, we're on a net export basis, 10% of our total supply is going out every year. That's a dramatic and incredible change. And it's had an interesting impact. For one, our policies were configured for supply scarcity and for demand surges. The demand surges came before the supply scarcity. And most of the last several decades were all about trying to come up with alternatives, ways to extend the mix, biofuels going into the liquid supply, a lot of ways to try to address that. We are now in a different place, and that different place has enabled a lot of commercial opportunity, a lot of energy security opportunity. 8 out of the 10 barrels over the 15 years through 2024 that were added to global supply came from United States liquids production. So that's a pretty significant contribution to global energy security. So a transition from scarcity to adequacy, but I would suggest maybe back to scarcity. We are now looking at a different kind of scarcity, not upstream supply scarcity, but midstream connectivity scarcity. We have enough molecules, but we can't move them from supply sources to demand centers. I think we'll talk about that. Let me give you a second transition to add to the first two, or the first one I gave you and the one Mike gave us. And that is a transition in our thinking about energy. Over the last 3 decades, this year will be the 30th Conference of Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So for more than 3 decades, we have been pricing in externalities. We've been talking about thinking about energy in terms of environmental consequences that we want to count in the price or in the cost of energy. Roughly quarter, 15 to 25% of governments at any given time are doing that. That isn't necessarily bad or good. I'm not taking a value judgment. ClearView doesn't. But I would suggest that we are also on the cusp of thinking about a different kind of externality. Environmental consequences are negative externalities, costs that economists say, you got to put it in the numbers because it's not being counted and it's bad. What about the things that aren't in the numbers that aren't being counted that are good? We've heard about this several times today, the positive externalities that could come from being able to organize demand, expand society, accelerate innovation, thanks to AI. Suddenly, we're looking at energy not just as a net negative, oh, wow, how do we minimize our consumption to manage the environmental consequence, but as a catalyst for all kinds of growth, including in the efficiency of our energy system. So a new kind of externality, a shift from scarcity to adequacy and maybe back to scarcity, and yes, supplementation in addition, not substitution.
So maybe, Kevin, I can turn to you. I know you've done a lot of work in this space. Would you be able to maybe speak to us about some of that work and kind of your perspective on government intervention, regulation of greenhouse gases that's come up and so on, and how that might apply to some of the conversation here?
Absolutely. So firstly, thank you, Stephen, for moderating this panel, and thank you, Andrew, for putting this wonderful conference together. Yeah, so at the Heritage Foundation Center for Data Analysis, we really take a deep data-driven look at many of these questions. So I actually have some slides. I was told that this was not intended to be a talk, but rather a conversation, and it will be a conversation, but I have some nice data visuals that I think will really shed light on many of the questions we've not only been asking at this panel, but throughout this conference as well. So let's see if this clicker works. Can we do the next slide? Perfect. So we did a statistical analysis of energy, of the link between access to affordable and reliable energy and human flourishing. And these are just some snippets of this analysis here. This paper is co-authored with my colleagues Diana Furchcott-Roth, Miles Pollard, and Richard Stern, and is available on the Heritage Foundation website. And here you see a chart. This is a cross-country analysis. Each dot is a country. And you could see on the x-axis, you have per capita energy consumption, and the y-axis, you have per capita GDP. And it's not surprising. Countries that consume more energy on a per capita basis are wealthier. And this is the thing here. Lawmakers, particularly many in Washington, D.C., fortunately not from what we've heard today at this conference, often take energy for granted. When you flip on a light switch, you run a conference, you do many of the things on a day-to-day basis. Many people don't realize the beauty that goes on behind the scenes, and we need access to affordable and reliable energy to do many of the things we do, and ultimately they are manifested in terms of what economists refer to as gross domestic product, but in the final manifestation that many of us see is in terms of income and our quality of life. Now, that is just on the income side, but we were actually talking about the externalities, the positive externalities and the negative externalities, and I can go on about this for hours, but let's see here. Next slide. Okay, well, I can talk about this a little bit. I didn't know this was in here, but this is fine.
Doesn't seem topically relevant, but go ahead.
Sure, okay. This is fine. So countries that consume more energy on a per capita basis can do many things, many things, including produce more agriculture. And here you can see that countries that consume more energy on a per capita basis have greater agricultural yield. And the reason is because Westernized countries, well-developed countries, have moved away from decades ago when human beings were doing a lot of the manual labor, and then now they can rely on machines, technology, and advanced techniques for machine learning to actually engage in a lot of this production. Next slide. This is a slide that I was looking for in terms of externalities here. So there is a link not only in terms of economic output, but in terms of public health. So we got 4 plots here. Again, each dot is a country, and the x-axis on all 4 plots is per capita energy consumption. And the first plot on the upper left is the number of doctors per 1,000 people. The second plot on the upper right is life expectancy. The 2 lower plots are child mortality and maternal mortality. And you could see access to energy enables doctors to get trained. It enables them to do their jobs. It enables them to help you and everybody else live longer, empower them literally with life-saving treatments. And as a result, also, you see lower child mortality rates, I should say, and maternal mortality rates as a result of what doctors can do. Now, next slide. In terms of the externalities here, and this to me is actually some of the most interesting aspects of this analysis here. Here we have 2 plots, deaths due to dirty air and deaths due to dirty water. And we often hear from people that from both sides of the aisle, we want clean air, we want clean water, and we want a healthy environment. Well, countries that consume more energy on a per capita basis do better on both metrics. And the reason is simple. You have tools to clean the air. You have safer equipment, say with kitchen ovens, for example. You have tools to sanitize water, and as a result, mortality, as a result of both of those, plummet. So the bottom line is access to affordable and reliable energy is paramount to a flourishing society. So then the question is, okay, here in the States, what can we do? Well, we had somebody from the Institute for Energy Research present here yesterday. Every couple of years, they issue their North American energy inventory, which quantifies the amount of oil, gas, and coal here in North America, separately in Mexico, the United States, and in Canada. So if you see the next slide, here is a plot from the Institute for Energy Research's study, and you could see that here in the States, we have over 1.6 trillion barrels of oil and over 4 quadrillion cubic feet of natural gas. We ain't running out anytime soon, I can tell you that. So here's a great question. What would happen if we could actually leverage these resources? Because what we've heard from lawmakers over the years is we need to constrict access to these resources, firstly, because they are finite. And I guess, yes, it depends on what you mean by finite. But secondly, the concern is that they are going to exacerbate climate change. Well, you can look at the next slide right here, and you could see that family income, and this is using, Adam Semensky was presenting earlier today, the Energy Information Agency's National Energy Modeling System. And here you could see the economic impact of their high oil and gas scenario, which involves a scenario of 50% more oil and gas than their business as usual case, injected, no pun intended, into the American economy. And you could see that as a result of more energy abundance, Americans are wealthier. Over a 25-year time horizon, you see over $300,000 of increased income for a family of 4. And the bottom line is the cost of electricity, cost of energy go down due to the higher supply, costs of hiring go down, more jobs, and everybody prospers. Now, Stephen had a question about greenhouse gas regulation. And again, one of the reasons that people seek to curb the use of fossil fuels is in the name of climate change. Now, the question is, okay, so we often hear lawmakers talk about reductions in climate change in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Well, it's worthwhile to go a step further and quantify the actual temperature impact. So I can just say this, that at the Heritage Foundation Center for Data Analysis, we have an IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change model, the model for the assessment of greenhouse gas-induced climate change, MAGIC with 2 C's. And if you were to simulate completely eliminating CO2 emissions in the United States right now, what would be the temperature impact, not the greenhouse gas impact, the temperature impact, because the former sounds large. What is the latter? Next slide. Oh, we don't have it here. Okay, that's fine. I could tell you anyway. Even assuming worst case scenarios by the IPCC, there would be less than 0.23 degrees Celsius temperature mitigation by the end of the century. Slim to none. And that is worst case scenarios about the climate warming. Now, what about the state of Pennsylvania right here? Well, I've run the numbers here for the state of Pennsylvania. In 2050, if this state were to stop using fossil fuels completely, there would be less than 0.004 degrees Celsius temperature mitigation by 2050 and less than 0.0081 degrees Celsius temperature mitigation by 2100. Slim to none. You wouldn't even be able to see it on a thermometer. Now, this is from a paper by my colleagues Diana Furchtgott-Roth and my former colleague Alex Fry, who's now at the Department of Labor, where they simulated the concept of, or the concern there is, of New York banning fracking. You could see here these counties on the twin tiers here, and above fracking was banned post-2010, and below fracking was banned, fracking was not banned, fracking continued. And the question is, this lends itself to a nice experimental design. That is, what would happen if New York were to actually allow for fracking? Well, the next slide, you could see that right here. And as a result of allowing for fracking along the twin tiers, you could see that Pennsylvania, the green line, had significantly higher income growth, over $74,000. New York dwindled to $50,000. But if it allowed fracking using the regression analysis my colleagues had put together, they would actually have significantly higher income. So bottom line is energy everywhere, including Pennsylvania, your neighboring state of New York, is fundamentally important for human flourishing, and this really shows you why.
I want to come back to this
Yes.
graph in a bit,
Please.
but Stephanie's been very patient waiting, and I want to go to her because we've been talking about all of the above energy. All right, we've been talking about the need to extract resources or use U.S. resources. We've talked about supply chain issues and so on. I actually joked a little bit yesterday before you arrived, right, when SMRs came up. I said, oh, SMRs have been 5 to 10 years off for 15 years now. So just would appreciate kind of your perspective on where you see nuclear playing a role kind of in the energy build out, both domestically and how we would be looking to move it overseas and kind of the U.S. positioning there and if and when you see it making an impact in what it is we're talking about.
Yeah, well, given where I sit, I don't think it's shocking that I'll say I see nuclear playing a huge role, both domestically and internationally. And I think that just gets to what we spoke about earlier, is just that no one could have predicted that this increased demand that's coming. And between data centers, manufacturing, electrification, you need power that's always on. You need reliability, and that's what nuclear is. It's clean and it's reliable, and I think that's why it appeals to both sides of the aisle, and I think we're seeing just tremendous support and tremendous momentum between the executive orders that are really making a push for nuclear build-out, as well as these tech companies that are investing billions of dollars in nuclear projects. Of course, yes, people have been saying this is coming for a long time, but I do think that we're at an inflection point now, and things are changing. People are starting to put dollars behind these projects. They're not just projects on paper, but they're real projects, they're real customers, there's shovels in the ground. Of course, it's not going to be a solution tomorrow, but that's why we have oil and gas. I would not say that nuclear is going to be a substitute. I think oil and gas will continue to carry. Renewables, of course, maybe will also be in complement with nuclear, and I think that gets to the all of the above approach. I think if we are really talking about energy dominance, you need to leverage every tool in your toolbox, nuclear included. And just to give kind of an example, Duke, a major utility, just announced their 2025 energy strategy, and they said that they're going to significantly increase nuclear and gas. Why? Because they want to have options. And I think when we're looking internationally, I think Russia's invasion of Ukraine has really heightened the need for this. People want nuclear power because it really enhances energy security. The fuel is on site. You can go a long time without refueling, and they can own and operate it themselves, and that's something that they really want. And past that, they really want to partner with the U.S. They don't trust partners like Russia and China anymore, and we can't export our technologies if we don't build at home. And so I think it's all interconnected, and I think just all of these factors are aligning for the future of nuclear to be really bright.
Could I just follow up on that a little bit? Do you see the future of nuclear being more the smaller, more modular reactors, or do you see a return to, say, like the Westinghouse AP1000, the larger centralized plant type model? And do we even have the workforce here in the United States at this point? Because it dissipated through the 80s and 90s, so kind of those trends.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to depend on where you're talking about. So at first we heard after Vogtle came online, everyone was kind of looking at SMRs because they just didn't need that much energy. And now we're thinking, okay, well, if they're going to build X number of SMRs, then maybe it just makes more sense to build large. And maybe that means multiple utilities or multiple companies, multiple off-takers going in on a large plant together. But I think when you look internationally, I think a lot of these smaller countries with smaller grids are looking at SMRs because it's all that they can support, or maybe they just don't have the land for it. And so I do think that it's going to be a mix, and also some of these SMRs that are coming to market serve different purposes. So down in Texas, Dow Chemical is looking to SMRs to decarbonize the chemical industry, and so I think there's just different uses for the different technologies that are coming to market. So I do think that you're going to see both.
So maybe, Kevin, could I come back to you then? Given the direction that we see, and it came up a bit again, I think in Mike's comments about swings in regulatory policy from one administration to the next, or just general approach. As we look to necessary development here in the United States, of the power sector, we just appreciate, your opinion on how those swings might be delaying, or maybe in some cases enhancing, kind of what the net impact is on the build out that we need to see here in the United States, and does that make us maybe less competitive overseas if we follow through what Mike was saying in terms of the uncertainty?
So we heard this morning Adam, and more recently Kevin, linking the relationship between GDP and energy. It's a pretty strong relationship. I think another relationship you shouldn't overlook is stability and prosperity. And let me say this before I get into that. Doing less with less is austerity. Doing more with less is efficiency. And confusing austerity for efficiency is somewhere between complacency and insanity. We're going to need more energy. And I think we need to think about that very practically. How do we get it? We get it by providing investors with stable returns on invested capital. How do we enable that? Well, policy stability would be a good starting point. Unfortunately, we find ourselves in an interesting time. Mike also used the metaphor of a pendulum. It's not a pendulum if it swings all the way around or it catapults off and leaves the clock entirely. And we're looking at greater amplitude. We're also seeing new dimensions of policy flux that are unhelpful for an investment perspective. And one of them that we know well is that regulatory policy has been swinging back and forth. But if you go downstream from regulatory policy, we're seeing permit stability evaporating, which means that it's very difficult to make reliable investments and expect them. Pipelines that are approved are suddenly no longer approved. hard to invest in that capacity. Same with renewable energy facilities. And then if we go upstream from the regulatory level, we're seeing policy flux at the legislative level. A lot of investors think, well, it would be great if we could just get through all this regulatory nonsense. At least we've got the laws we can count on. But if those laws are changing, then we're going to start to get in the way of some of those returns. I think that what would be really helpful would be to depoliticize energy just a little bit. Some statistics. If we look at the top 10 fossil energy producing states, it's true that 8 out of 10 of them were states that voted on a popular basis for Trump in 2024. 2 did not, Colorado and New Mexico, and very significant fossil energy producers. The rocks don't vote, and neither, to quote the Blue Oyster Cult, do the wind or the sun and the rain. It's the people above them who do. And if you actually broaden the aegis to include nuclear in that primary energy numbers, those 10 states were 90% of fossil energy. The 10 states that are 80% of total energy include 3 blue states, the third being Illinois. And so you have a diversity of political opinions. It might be time to stop thinking maybe in terms of the politics of energy, being for or against fossil fuels, for or against. You should be for BTUs at lower cost, greater volume, as to the maximum extent possible, as clean as possible.
Okay, I want whoever's recording this to just transcribe that. I want to put so much of that as like needlepoint or something above my doors. That's just great. Landon, you were nodding. Did you have something you wanted to add there? I've tried to be sensitive to your voice a little bit.
No, I'm happy to jump in. Look, I think if you're going to talk about depoliticizing energy, you also have to think about what is politicizing energy. And I think that we've created an ecosystem in the last 20 years that is making this polarized aspect of policymaking in Washington, D.C. a feature, not an intermittent aspect of policymaking. And for me, I think that there's a lot to say. Kevin talked about climate change and those elements. The reality is we are creating very powerful lobbies on both sides because renewable energy, nuclear energy, fossil energy can all be economic in different pathways. And you can regulate to favor one or give subsidies to favor one in a manner that I think is very polarizing in Washington, D.C. A part of why that happened in 2009 is something that the Trump administration just took down, which was the endangerment finding and this idea that there's a whole judicial architecture, not just a legislative architecture, that can be punitive against fossil energy through the greenhouse gas protocol and for the conversations around how people are dealing with emissions. And I think we also need to talk about depolarizing emissions and fuel. This is really a demand side issue. And the longer we make policy that is punitive towards a fuel source or punitive towards a consumer culture, I think the stronger incentive we have for people to fight back, because there is a profit to be made and a desire to have energy, access, abundance, whatever you want to call it. And so I want to say, we have to go back to the causal element of why we have this polarization to begin with. And for me, part of that is the ecosystem we've created on the climate front.
Yeah, well, no, I was just going to add, I completely agree with what Landon said. I think one of the best approaches is that we should allow all forms of energy to compete on a level playing field without subsidies for any forms of energy. And then the best ones will win. Because in certain areas, renewables can actually be more viable than others. For example, Southern California, Hawaii for solar power, Washington State for hydropower, for example, right? And in certain northern European countries, for example, wind power is actually much more dominant. But nuclear power, as Stephanie was alluding to. So what we really need is a market that does not have subsidies or credits or anything that really favors or props up one form of energy over another. And then the best ones will win. And I think when you have subsidies, what happens is you have manifestations of special interests that are coming from the lobbyists that end up crowding out investment in other forms of energy that could actually help with us achieving energy abundance.
Yeah, I don't want to turn into economic theory and externalities and market failure and so on. I'm looking at the panel in case you all want to say anything, but if not, I want to turn it into the. Did you want to say one
just one
last thing?
contextual thing? So
Yeah.
Landon talked
but-
about the polarization
Yeah.
issue, and if you go back to 2008, there were 2 candidates running for president who were supportive of offshore drilling and also climate change mitigation, maybe not in the same order. And here we are.
Yeah, Bush in 2005 puts through CAFE standards on vehicles. We have environmental policy in Republican circles 20 years ago, and now we're deviating. And so it's not just enough to talk about subsidies in a market. It's enough to talk about like the core cause of why you're seeing polarization and creating lobbies and really political band-aids, which are the tariff regimes or the sponsorship we have for different energy sources, because we have a perversion in how we're trying to create those markets in the first place.
Okay, again, we have great expertise up here, and as much as I would love to just keep talking to them all afternoon, they're really more here for you. So if I could turn it out, I think Andrew's got a microphone. That's it.
Thank you all. Kevin Book, I believe you said that it would be good if we could depoliticize energy. I certainly agree with that wholeheartedly. And so my question is, how do we do that?
Well, so Landon, I think, started talking a little bit about the mechanism of how we got there. How do we go back from that? One of the ways is to understand the linkage that the other Kevin on the panel was talking so much about, which are the end user benefits of energy. We actually don't produce energy so we can create energy jobs. It turns out that the labor intensity of upstream production in the United States has fallen by about 50% over the last 15 years. But the number of jobs until recently had gone up quite a lot. The reason was that we produced a lot more energy, even at lower labor intensity, greater efficiency. And the end user benefits of that, the result that we had in price stability globally, as well as the availability of raw materials for our industrial production and the jobs that we created in other sectors, those derivative effects are quite significant. Now, connecting the dots is hard. A lot of people sort of fell asleep when I said the first sentence, and they've been asleep ever since. It's a tough topic to open up, but it's the you in the BTU that matters the most. It's the end user. Our energy policy in the United States is about empowering people to do things with energy, not for energy. And the more that we can connect the dots, the more we can get a sense that this is a benefit for everyone.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add that in terms of energy and the economic growth, there's actually, almost two mini stories in this. Firstly, like when you think about fracking itself, there are job opportunities with the extraction for the companies themselves, but then locally, hotels, motels, laundromats, restaurants get business. But ultimately, because we inject, no pun intended, more energy supply into the American economy, everything is better for everybody in terms of lower cost of energy, costs of hiring go down, and greater income for everybody.
Sid, there's a pretty robust political discussion in Washington, D.C. right now around carbon accounting, and not to be overly nuanced here, but when you think about emissions and pushing through Scope 1 emissions throughout the value chain, so created emissions from combustion of energy or energy use, and those move through the value chain, what you find is that emissions are ubiquitous with that GDP growth and that opportunity space. And so I think that we have to have a more honest conversation about, we can talk about emissions and we can talk about an all of the above energy strategy and really separate those. And the longer we're polarized on the emissions dialogue, I think the longer we lead to polarization within the political context. I use, as I'm talking to the White House right now, and a nod to our Saudi colleagues that made the trip from the kingdom here to the Drake Well, I use the Saudi Aramco sustainability report as a benchmark in terms of global change. Because if there's any one country in the world that has an interest in perpetuating the life of fossil energy, it's the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And right now, despite the policies that are happening in Washington, Saudi Arabia is planning, Aramco is planning on a net zero 2050 landscape. And so that to me is a signal that the global trajectory of dialogue has not deviated despite Washington's dialogue. And frankly, Washington's dialogue is schizophrenic because it changes between parties. And so I think, for me, to be an honest answer on this, and as a proponent of oil and gas and the abundance and the opportunity that creates for America, I really want us to be more ambitious about addressing the other side of the conversation because it's still a very live debate globally.
Okay, do we have an? Yep.
Okay, hi.
You're next. Go ahead. You, and then after you just pass the microphone back.
So given everything that's been said, I'll ask kind of a two-part question. One, are we in an energy emergency? And if it doesn't matter what your answer is, but what does that open for the next Democratic administration to use that method to push policies?
At the highest level, which I think is where we want to treat this topic, we've moved from an era of rules to an age of power. Whatever you call power, whether you say it's emergency powers or some other kind of power, people generally seem to be wanting their government to be as responsive as, say, Amazon. They want answers faster. They can get packages overnight. Why does it take 10 years to get a permit? Why does it take 5 years to get an answer or 2 years to get a bill? Why can't anyone pass a budget? So I think that whether or not you think it's good, and there are a lot of people with opinions, again, my job is not to have opinions, just to analyze them, you can see that a lot of power has been concentrated in the executive. It would be game theoretically and politically unrealistic to expect a differently minded future administration not to take advantage of those powers given the opportunity.
Okay, just wanted to see if anyone else wanted to touch that. I appreciate your bravery taking that one on. Could we go back here?
Hi, my name is Azaria Gregory. I'm an 11th grade student at Oil City High School. And I just wanted to ask, do you believe our world is going to become even more like survival of the fittest than it already is? Well, I feel personally that it already is, and I know how supply and demand works. I know that prices go up, prices go down. And I was just wondering, with the possibilities of running out of these resources, we might be in the clear, but what about our future generations, our children, our grandchildren? What if we do run out of these resources for energy? And just, do we believe that the world will come more to the rich are going to survive more than the poor?
I'm going to use your question and give the panel time to think about their response, but I'm going to use your question to jump off with something I wanted to ask Stephanie, or I wanted to take to Stephanie. So I've heard a lot over the past couple days, and Kevin sort of alluded to it as well, about we need purely a free market approach. Said more, I think politically yesterday, is get the government out of energy, okay? And I would take some issue with that myself, okay? I am fully supportive of the said free market approach, but I believe the government should be stepping in where there's market failure. For instance, nuclear, okay? You are not going to get a new nuclear facility underwritten, right, under current economic standards, right? So you need public support to push forward new technologies. As just one example of where you might need certain government engagement. So I just, Stephanie, I'm putting words in your mouth by saying that, but I would just kind of appreciate, your perspective on, what support nuclear would need going forward, right? And then after that, we'll get to a more direct answer to your question from the rest of the panel.
Yeah, we need a lot of support on all fronts, but I think we're feeling good about where things are now because this administration is very supportive of nuclear for multiple different reasons. And I think what NEI is doing right now is taking these executive orders, which really were to support nuclear and to push us forward and figuring out, okay, but in practice, how do we do that? We do need support from you guys, but they also need guidance from industry on how they can help. And so I think it's going to be government and industry working together in lockstep to get these technologies deployed at home. Of course, some of that is going to be funding for these advanced reactor demonstration projects, building out our fuel supply, but also looking in the international space. If we want to compete globally, then we need a lot of support over there in terms of getting 123 agreements in place. You mentioned Saudi Arabia. That would be a huge market for us if that was in place. And so we need a lot of government support, but together with industry. And so I take the point about, not having it be political, but I think there is a difference between, government support and politicizing energy. So I take both sides.
Can I direct the...
Please, yeah.
So on the young lady's question, and I think that really two things come to mind for me. One is national security as a primary driver, and the second is innovation. Let me take them in both in that order. We talk a lot about the energy trilemma. We talk about the need for secure, reliable, affordable energy. And so it has a security element, an economic element, and a sustainability element often in that trilemma. I think I agree with a growing body of research that points really that national security is the principal driver in those three. There is a big brother within that dialogue. And so I do think the friction you're feeling is a testament to the fact that energy is not just economic opportunity, it's also often power and influence. And so you'll continue to see that for as long as all the nations are running and we're not in absolute anarchy. That's just a feature. The second part, and Kevin, jumping on this, is innovation. And so I think Stephanie has technology, and I think there's an abundance of innovation in the nuclear field. There's future energies and fusion. There's also the material science side. So as you have a conversation, I'm surprised we haven't spent time on the critical minerals and China's pure dominance over that value chain. That we're also innovating new technologies and magnets and other elements of our global system, our economic system, that are inspired by those bottlenecks. And so I think we learned a lot from COVID-19 and the shutdown, the pandemic, because we've realized how fragile some of these supply chains are, and it's allowing us to have a really new, innovative period of time that I think matches potentially the last crisis that we saw in the 1970s.
Just to add to that, other countries that look at us and they're kind of envious of how things look for us. The oceans help a lot in buffering our security risks, but over history of the United States, we've benefited over and over again, even when we've stumbled, from natural resource wealth and productivity of labor gains. And now the two are connected in what looks like it could be a moment of great opportunity. And in terms of the security parameters that Landon was discussing, I mean, I think that we do project influence into the world with our energy exports. It's a non-trivial contribution to global stability. And it's one that I think, even if you were coming in for energy transition, as the Biden administration was, thinking practically about events in Eastern Europe, and for that matter, events in the Middle East, required a pragmatic turn. And so the transition that we're still talking about, which is still happening, I think we established that from the very outset, becoming more pragmatic and outcomes focused and less prescriptive, looking at what we're trying to achieve and how we get there rather than trying to define the path that we take, is probably more useful. But as we do that, there's a lot of people who say energy security depends on diversification. The most fundamental energy security is the stuff under your feet. And so trading globally priced hydrocarbons, where you have variable cost risks you don't necessarily control, for globally sourced transition metals and minerals, where you have fixed cost risks you don't control, may not be an absolute benefit. So I think what you're seeing from this administration, and to some extent from the last one, is a pragmatism, where they're saying, wow, we've got all that gas Kevin mentioned, 4,000 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. What an immense resource. Why would we not be using that? And why would we not be using that for our friends?
Yeah. I'd like to follow up to both questions, actually. First, I'll respond to your question. So I've talked to people, I've been in this space for about 12 years, so I've talked to people over the years about this. And the bottom line is you don't know how much there is until you actually start drilling. And every time we have estimated how much oil and gas we have, it's actually undershot what the subsequent estimate has been. And it keeps going up. Now, that's not going to keep going up forever, but the bottom line is that there is a vast supply that is definitely going to be available for us in the foreseeable future and beyond that. Now, again, in the long run, though, technology is evolving, and then, yes, in terms of all these other forms of energy, including renewables, I think that there is significant opportunity for the market to evolve and these things to be these forms of energy to be more feasible for all of us, including nuclear technology. I'd like to respond briefly regarding subsidies for nuclear. So it's not my area of research, but my colleague Jack Spencer has just published a book, The Nuclear Revolution, where he argues in the book against subsidies and instead fundamentally reforming the regulatory apparatus there to make nuclear power more feasible. That would be like a whole nother talk in itself, but I think there are policy ideas out there to really get nuclear off the ground and unleash it.
So could I address...
Andrew has a question, I think.
Well, let me say my one bit, and then we'll go to the question. So, one point I think we need to keep in mind as well is we're doing an awful lot of conversation about the correlation right between energy and GDP. Okay, GDP is not uniformly distributed right across the population, right? So one of the things, because we're supposed to have a local flavor to this event, I think that would be useful to address, especially to the young lady's question, right, is as we speak to this energy abundance in the United States right now and how further extraction and trade is going to lead to more GDP, is that GDP going to be realized in the energy producing regions by the local population as opposed to said corporations that are extracting the resource, right? And I'm not going bleeding hard on you right now, but just to throw that out there, it's more like how can local communities better benefit from these resources we have? And I know this isn't necessarily all of your policy expertise, but I've got the microphone, so I'm asking. So let me throw it out to you all.
Well, we saw the study that I presented earlier.
But what I'm saying is that GDP isn't uniformly distributed across the population, right?
Well, there's obviously
yeah.
distribution
Okay.
in terms of
Yeah.
income throughout any population.
So Pennsylvania's got its own regulatory apparatus, which includes an impact fee to take some of the proceeds from production and give them to the people who are in the areas where the production is taking place, which is different from a more typical redistributive mechanism of a severance tax, which generally applies it to the state's spending. That more localized approach has been given plaudits and criticism, but I think it tries to get at some of what you're looking at. More broadly, though, the producing states, if you ask, do the Democrats who are the ascendant power in New Mexico love hydrocarbons? The answer is I don't think most of them do. They love the benefits that hydrocarbons bring to their local economy. Roads and schools, they are not necessarily fighting for the industry. They don't necessarily love the industry, but they do recognize the economic benefit and they work practically, and they think, well, this is something that we want more of, or at least we want to maximize the benefits for local opportunities. So there are distributional consequences to ownership, and you have a highly concentrated wealth result from the investment in capital into the oil and gas sector. That has led to a lot of populist criticism of the oil and gas industry since its very beginning, right? So Oil Can Harry, if you go back to the Looney Tunes cartoons, I think it was Looney Tunes, is not a sympathetic figure. If you look at him sort of menacing Pearl Pureheart in the old cartoons, it doesn't look like it's a good thing. That popular perception is not new, but it overlooks that there are distributional reallocation benefits for the population. People who own stock in their oil companies indirectly, without realizing it as part of their mutual funds and retirement funds, are also benefiting. So some of those questions about distributional consequences and benefits are very, very real, particularly when you talk about environmental justice communities who are bearing the consequences of industrial activity in any industry. But there are a lot of efforts that have been undertaken deliberately by governments and policies, and then there are others that just happen by consequence of ownership and equity stakes.
Yeah, if I could just add on some of the community benefits of nuclear and what we've seen with nuclear projects that are happening right now. Nuclear does support, because when you think about it, it's an 80-year relationship at least. So it's not just the construction, but it's the operation, the maintenance. And so DOE has quoted, I think, 470,000 jobs supported, and nuclear is one of the highest paying energy subsectors. And so a lot of these communities are seeing that, and they actually want it. So to take the TerraPower project in Wyoming, for example, we hear a lot of times with energy, not in my backyard, not in my backyard, but we're actually hearing the opposite for the TerraPower project. And multiple communities wanted to be the ones to host this project because they realized the benefits that it would bring to the community, and now they're looking to have more projects. So obviously they only picked one town, but others want that because they understood once they saw it kind of in action how that actually could directly benefit the people that live there.
I cut a gentleman off, I'm sorry, so we'll go back there first.
My name is Mark Pearson. I'll be talking this afternoon. I'd like to address the lady's question. You are so blessed. Why? Because in coal and natural gas, the world has somewhere between 200 and 300 years worth of supply. In oil, it's only 52 years. But when I was your age, it was 28 years. So when I was at high school and a junior in the late 70s, actually mid-70s, but I like to think of it as the late 70s or 80s, the world was using 60 million barrels a day of oil, and there was only 28 years of supply left. We were going to be out of oil in the year 2000 or thereabouts. Today we use 104 million barrels a day of oil, on a global basis, and we have 52 years of supply. More than likely, because as the panelists have told us, because of technology, because of, as we heard in the last panel, maybe oil needs to go up to $75 instead of $60. Maybe it'll be 100 years. It's not 500 years, but it's not 25 years or 30 years as it was when I was your age. So we have a lot of resource to turn into a reserve that we can then use. And so it's not an issue that we're running out this decade, next decade, or whatever. There is, decades to centuries of hydrocarbon available.
Okay, we had, let's go here, and then I think we're running out of time, if that's fair.
Sorry, where's this going?
We're gonna go here, then here. Oh, okay, so we're gonna go here. You can ask 2 questions then,
Oh,
and then.
excellent. Okay, no, I won't abuse my privileges. Thank you again for all of your insights. I think the conversation about how do you depoliticize any issue is worthwhile, given where we sit today, and energy is an especially interesting case. One thing that we're noticing, at least the trends in Pennsylvania and in other quote-unquote swing states, where there is some energy production, is just the rising cost of electricity is now on voters' minds. People are talking about this is going to drive the governor's race in New Jersey, for instance. And that seems to have an equalizing effect on what people want in terms of energy policy. And so I'm noticing this, that when you poll people and you contrast things like energy affordability with maybe, investments in more carbon emission reduction or other types of, subsidies, if you will, or changes in policy, people just want affordable energy. And that does seem to have a depoliticizing effect. So I wonder if any of you could speak to if you're seeing any of those trends in your own work in different places, maybe outside of Pennsylvania, but when affordability becomes an issue, everything else becomes secondary.
So I'm gonna talk at the beginning again to give the panelists time to collect their thoughts. I really wish if Greg was still in the room, I'd put him on the spot and throw it out to him as a former state regulator. Because when we talk about rising costs of energy, if you go to your electric power bill, only about half of it is actually the wholesale cost of energy, right? The other half, the retail rate that we're all paying, are various adders that the voters or the state legislature have approved, okay? And like in Virginia, I think I'm paying 15, 16 cents right now. The vast majority of that is for coal site cleanup, pre-funding for an offshore wind farm, for other cleanup projects around the state that get added, consumer use tax, all these little adders that get put on the bill. So I'm not saying that that's the driver of the rise, but what I'm saying is when we think about energy costs, we do need to also be sensitive to the difference between the wholesale rate that's coming from the generation sources versus the retail rate, or these adders that get put onto all of the respective bills that we're paying. Okay, that was just my miniature soapbox moment, right, to give the panelists time. Please let me pass on to them.
So I have a paper actually on the Heritage Foundation website with my colleagues Mario Loyola as well as my former colleague Andrew Weiss, where we looked at residential electricity prices in all 50 states, and what we noticed is that they are higher overwhelmingly in general they are higher in states that have renewables mandates. Because what's happening is the state is artificially inducing demand for certain forms of energy that aren't that I wouldn't say necessarily have zero demand, but that demand is not there, and that has manifestations and consequences in terms of prices.
So I actually spoke to that exact issue. I do a video cast with my colleague at Center for Strategic and International Studies every 2 weeks, head of the program there, Joseph Mikett, and energy program there. And we looked at that, and we raised a question. We didn't answer the question. Why is this? And it can be for a lot of reasons that you see those renewables mandates correlating with higher rates, residential retail rates. One of them could be that the rates were already high, and they looked at renewables as an alternative because they were looking to come up with another source of power. Another could be that actually there's other factors at work, industrial composition, regulated market status, that kind of thing. So you do want to be careful, but the correlation is pronounced. One thing I would say, though, is that we're having the affordability conversation and we're having the access conversation now, and less about the sustainability conversation, and we should reflect on why that is. I think a lot of people say, well, it's because it's being deprioritized and people don't care anymore. That's a very negative way of looking at it. I would give you a positive aspect to it, which is if you look at the history of environmental regulation in the United States, we've overcome an immense amount of pollution and improved the cleanliness of our performance. If you look at the safety and reliability of our energy sector, we essentially count on it without having to think about it. That's extraordinary and wonderful. And now that we're finally at a point where we're able to focus on rates in a time of demand growth, and we're saying, wow, these are really expensive, we have to figure this out, that is our first concern, and that it can be our binding concern, as Mike Summers said it would be, is actually part of the success of our environmental technology gains and performance in response to both market and regulatory signals.
There's a third related energy transition we haven't talked about today, which is over the last half century, we've gone from 2% electrification to 20% electrification plus. And I think, yes, we can talk about the wholesale cost of energy and how low they can be at times. We're not spending enough time speaking about the energy system costs of being able to introduce energies, and also the bottlenecks we've created, what Kevin started with in terms of actually permitting projects and building. I really need to see us move to a build-first culture. It took us 4 years to build the Golden Gate Bridge, 5 years to build the Hoover Dam, and we're spending a significant amount of time building much less challenging projects that we just can't get realized right now, that are also now beginning to weigh on those energy prices. And I think having been in multiple administrations and having been in the Trump White House the first time on the National Security Council, I've seen gasoline prices, I've seen fuel prices for cars be a real big political driver. Power prices, because of that injection scale of electrification across the economy, are now becoming something very similar. So anticipate this being a thematic element for the next decade.
Okay, so we're on the same page. I'm getting the cut signal in the back.
One last comment.
Oh, please.
I came to, having grown up in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, for the high school and college students here, Penn State is a wonderful, unbelievable university. And you can study almost anything that you want to study there. And it could be economics, it could be statistics. Penn State has in Williamsport something called the Pennsylvania College of Technology. And I was just there last weekend for a high school reunion. The two biggest majors at Pennsylvania College of Technology are welding. And so this is a 4-year school, so you're going to learn lots of things, but you can learn welding and you can learn electronics and electrical work. Those are the two biggest majors. So the graduates in the welding and electrical parts of PCT are earning more in their first jobs than the faculty. True story. So if you want to, read a lot, be curious, find something that you think looks interesting, and then go learn about it. And if you really want to, if you think that this industry is something that you like to be involved in, you can become a welder and do really, and life would be good. And it was said a number of times here, don't be pessimistic about what the future looks like given everything that happens with resources and that kind of thing. Markets, prices, and technology work together, and generally speaking, we are on a path towards better living conditions, not worse, and I basically think that that's going to continue, and you can be part of that in many different ways.
Okay, I think that's a great way to end. Normally I give the panelists like 30 seconds at the end, but I think we're so short on time that we're just going to cut here. Could you all give me a round of applause for the group here?
Fantastic panel. So we're going to adjourn to lunch. One quick word, though. Actually, two quick words. Very, very quick, because I know you're all hungry. This is Tatiana Anderson. She is our Secretary-Treasurer of the Drake Energy Security Forum and our social media guru. Take it away.
And I'm grabbing the mic for 30 seconds. Thank you so much to all of you for participating. Part of participation is amplifying this great convening outside of these walls. So we ask that you follow us on social media. We would love to follow you back. You can find us at the Drake Forum on X, Drake Forum on LinkedIn, Forum Drake on Instagram. We have lady interns back here who are helping with social. Can you raise your hands? If you don't remember those addresses or need assistance, please ask them. We would love to follow you back. And thanks to all of you who have participated in our mini interviews. We hope to talk to you more as the day goes on. Thank you, Andrew.
Fantastic. And the last word is, every year we take a historical image, often from the archive here at Drake Well. This one, as you see, Energy for America is as relevant as it ever was. This was produced by API in 1959 for the 100th anniversary of oil. You've seen it over here on a foam board. We produce them as posters every year. We've given them to Friends of Drake Well out in the gift shop. They're for sale for $10 each. I would highly encourage you to get them and spread them around. They also have a lot of other wonderful things out there. But first, get some food, and then go buy some stuff, and we'll see you back here after lunch. Thanks very much.